Today is the anniversary of the bombing of Fort Sumter down in Charleston Harbor in South Carolina. April 12th, 1861. In the presidential election of 1860, of course, that unknown guy from Illinois by the name of Abraham Lincoln won the presidency. And with that, I want to ask you a what-if question in history. I love doing these. If Lincoln had not won, would we still have lost 700,000 lives in the war? And could slavery been abolished without the war? Let's talk about that. Now, a year before this bombing, in Charleston, they held the National Democrat Convention for the 1860 presidential election. The leading candidate by far was Stephen A. Douglas. Now, he's the guy that had defeated Lincoln in the senatorial race in the state of Illinois, and they had those famous Lincoln-Douglas debates. And they were in agreement on the slavery issue. Both of them agreed that the slave states could remain slave states. Their difference, though, Douglas said new territories and states, he would leave it up to their sovereignty to decide. Whereas Lincoln said, nope, we're not going to have the expansion of slavery. And of course, they both agreed that blacks would never have equal rights with whites. Now, in the convention, the Democrats required a 2/3 vote for their candidate, and Douglas didn't quite get that. So they scheduled another convention a couple of months down the road in Baltimore. And for some reason, a bunch of Southerners boycotted that. So Douglas won easy, but the Southerners said, we're going to run our own guy. And it was John Breckinridge, who was the active or the current vice president under Buchanan. So in the 1860 election, you had the Republican Abraham Lincoln and two Democrats, Douglas and Breckinridge. They, of course, split the vote. They had 60% of the vote. Lincoln won the presidential election with just 39% of the vote. Let that sink in for a second. If Douglas had won the election, and by the way, if the Southerners had just gone with him, he would have defeated Lincoln easily. He had Southern states behind him. He would have won the election. Now, the issue of Fort Sumter, Lincoln said when he first entered the White House, he was going to resupply and fortify that at the request of Major Anderson, who was the commander of the fort. And realize the Southerners' problem with the fort was this would put federal, United States soldiers in their territory, and they were objecting to that and asking them to leave. Once Lincoln said he's going to resupply it, the Southerners said, all right, it's time to move militarily. And when they asked Major Anderson to surrender, he would not, and they started the bombing on April 12th, 34 hours, and no one died. That's the most amazing thing to me. If you've been to Fort Sumter, I have. How no one died in that is just beyond me. But they didn't, but with that, the Civil War was off. If Douglas had won, he would not have refortified the fort. He wouldn't have cared. It wasn't a big issue. It was just a political symbol. He also, I think, in time would have freed the slaves. I think it would have happened naturally, plantation by plantation. And honestly, I think that would have been a better way, taken a little longer, because by the instant abolition, 4 million slaves moved into a society that simply was not ready, which led to incredible Jim Crow laws, way too many lynchings. And I really believe if Douglas had won, you might have saved 700,000 lives, and slaves would have still been freed, and maybe without as much of the Jim Crow laws and the lynchings. I don't know. It's my theory. What do you think?